if not astonishingly disturbing solutions. But a closer look inside that meeting also reveals a leader with an unwavering commitment to curbing migration into the United States, no matter the cost. The piece reads in part, quote, "In the Oval Office that March afternoon, a 30-minute meeting extended to more than 2 hours as Mr. Trump's team tried desperately to placate him. You are making me look like an idiot, Mr. Trump shouted, adding in a profanity as multiple officials in the room described it. I ran on this. It's my issue." Joining me now is someone who knows well the inner workings of the Oval Office. Chris Whipple is the author of The Gatekeepers, How White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. I don't know what you're going to do when you update your book to include this presidency. I know you've done the beginning of this presidency, but it might have to be a blank set of pages because there are no chiefs of staff. There don't even seem to be senior staff acting as guardrails on this president.
Well, look, maybe the good news, Ali, is that there are no moats or snakes as far as we know on the border. Right. But the truth is, as we've talked about for a long time now, the guardrails are gone. The grown-ups are gone. The chief of staff has abdicated his most important duty, which is to tell the president what he doesn't want to hear. Whether that's possible with this president, who knows? But I think we're in a scary place. I think, just to underline something Matt Miller said earlier, it's the president's state of mind. You know, in the darkest days of Watergate, when Richard Nixon was walking the halls, talking to the oil portraits and drinking heavily, James Schlesinger, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, made sure that he had the nuclear codes safe. Richard Nixon's mental state was far superior, I think, to Donald Trump's mental state. We saw it today. So we are in a scary place, I think, right now.
Right, because this is not about firing a random person. The language that he's using, he's talked about civil war. He's talked about traitors. He said he wants to find this whistleblower and everybody who talked to the whistleblower. He talked about a coup. A coup is a violent uprising. Impeachment is not a violent uprising. It's prescribed by law. But the language, it may or may not be President Trump who does the bad thing. He might, because he could set us into a war. But people might act on his words.
Well, and he's gone from angry, crazy to apoplectic. And I couldn't help thinking as I was watching him today about something a very senior former White House official told me, who knows the president well. He said, "This is a man who fears no God and no man." He didn't say no woman. And I think Nancy Pelosi has him terrified. You know, we saw her this morning. She was focused. She was laser-like. She gave this very powerful civics lesson, a lesson that Trump has never absorbed. I think he's just terrified.
Let's talk about a civics lesson. The whistleblower operates under a system that is designed to protect people who want to come forward and say, I think something is wrong, right? It is an integral part of government and business. The president is now trying to paint this as a conspiracy with Adam Schiff, the head of the the House Intelligence Committee. He's floating that out there.
Well, it's a ridiculous notion, at least so far as we know at this point. Based on what we know, it's no mystery that the whistleblower wanted to reach out to the Hill and get at least some kind of a heads up on where to go.
How this plays out.
How this plays out. Because, in fact, if not for the IG and the Director of National Intelligence's office, we might not know about that complaint to this day. The IG gave Capitol Hill a heads up, gave Schiff's office a heads up. I think the whistleblower was concerned because, as we now know it had been bottled up by the White House and the Department of Justice.
Chris, do you think when you see what you saw today, we saw the president in 2 instances, we've seen, I don't even know how many tweets we've seen from the president in the last week about this exclusively, but we're into well over 100 at this point. What happens next? Because this does feel a little different than what we've been talking about for the last 2 years. Today, the president, as you said, seemed apoplectic. He was lying at a pace we hadn't seen before, things that are provably false. What happens next?
Well, I think where we are right now is we talked about there being no guardrails. The guardrails now, the people that we have to count on are people like the whistleblower in the agencies. The floodgates have opened. People are coming forward. As Nancy Soderberg said, the truth will out. But it's really critical for the House committees to follow the example of Peter Rodino and Liz Holtzman. The gold standard was 1974 when they were very sober about this, and Pelosi's been very successful at that so far.
And Liz Holtzman said today that she thinks the House Judiciary Committee is actually being more effective now than they might have been in Watergate. So we'll watch that happen. Chris, thank you as always. Chris Whipple is the author of The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff define every presidency. That is it for me. I will see you again at 1 p.m. tomorrow. Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace begins now.
Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York as public support for an impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump rises, and the House committees investigating the president's request for dirt on the Bidens from a foreign government reaches deep into the West Wing with a threat of subpoenas. Donald Trump appeared to totally lose it today after a night and morning of increasingly paranoid and agitated social media posts that seemed to warn of his impending outburst. The president let it rip in an Oval Office appearance and then again during a news conference in the East Room. His outbursts included threats for the whistleblower, whose account of presidential misconduct has been almost entirely corroborated by the president himself and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. The presidential tantrum came after Democrats held a press conference of their own, warning that stonewalling the impeachment inquiry could lead to charges of obstruction of justice. Here's House Intel Committee Chairman Adam Schiff.
We are concerned that the White House will attempt to stonewall our investigation, much as they have stonewalled other committees in the past. It's why I say the White House needs to understand that any action like that, that forces us to litigate or have to consider litigation, will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice. And of course, that was an article of impeachment against Nixon, the obstruction of the lawful functions of Congress, that is. We will also draw the inference, though, as appropriate, that they are trying to conceal facts that would corroborate the allegations in the whistleblower complaint. So we'll have to decide whether to litigate or how to litigate. We're not fooling around here, though.
In response, the leader of the free world typed BS, the long version, in all caps. Then he made these comments.
We had an exact transcript. And when we produced that transcript, they died. Because you look at the whistleblower statement, and it's vicious. Vicious. And that whistleblower, there's no question in my mind that some bad things have gone on, and I think we'll get to the bottom of it. And the only ones that don't like my conversation are the ones that never read it, but they heard Shifty Schiff. That's what I call a lie, and because of the fact that he's lying about the President of the United States and as to what the President says. You know, I believe it or not, I watch my words very carefully. There are those that think I'm a very stable genius, okay? I watch my words very, very, very closely. And to have somebody get up and to totally fabricate a conversation that I had with another leader and make it sound so bad, it was so evil.
Literally no one on the record describing him as a stable genius. But all this is happening in the shadow of a potentially more consequential meeting right now, a closed-door briefing on Capitol Hill by the State Department Inspector General. That's following his urgent request to present documents to Congress related to the State Department and Ukraine. That's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Joining us from Capitol